This is the Egnater Rebel 20. Probably one of the coolest discontinued amps that I've just recently come to find out about. So quick backstory, Egnater was started by its founder Bruce Egnater in 1980 in Detroit as a custom shop off of 8 Mile Road. Besides just giving the historical context behind this amp that some people might not know about, my family actually is all from Detroit and they grew up off of 7 Mile Road. So I think it's really cool to have an amp here in my studio that's kind of loosely connected to the area in which my family is from. It's a little hard to gather information on boutique guitar amp brand unless you're digging in the forums and talking to people who actually know about it, but it seems like they were actually pretty popular by the late 2000s. And even though I was only 8 years old in 2008 when the Rebel 20 came out, it's my understanding that it kind of helped to, I don't even want to use too harsh of a word, solidify, maybe not pioneer, but push forward the whole like lunchbox amp segment. These were made in China just for affordability, but they were designed 100% by Bruce Egnater, and they ran up until about 2014. And to my knowledge, the brand kind of discontinued in like 2022, so maybe they're on their way to becoming modern classics. I don't know. The market doesn't really seem to think so. You can still pick these up on Reverb for like, I don't know, under $500. It doesn't really seem to be that hard to find either. I'm seeing like almost 10 of them on Reverb right now. Let's dive into some of the technical specs. 20 watt, hence name Rebel 20. It is all tube. Interestingly, there is actually a variable watt knob right here, so you can turn this all the way down to 1 watt and still get that tube breakup even in a bedroom setting. Pretty lightweight. The head is about 14 pounds. 3 12AX7 preamps, but the magic kind of happens in the power section. You have 2 EL84s and 2 6v6s that you can blend. So in theory, you can either dial in 100% EL84 or 100% 6v6 or somewhere in the middle, which is kind of cool. Speaker output, you have 4, 8, and 16 ohms, so it is pretty cab friendly. I happen to have the matching cab. Those are a little bit harder to find on Reverb. And you have an effects loop on the back panel, which is kind of nice. I wouldn't really consider that standard on amps of this size, so nice to see that the attention to detail was before there. Cab is closed back, 12-inch speaker, birch plywood, loaded with a custom Celestion Egnater Elite 80 speaker, 80 watts, 16 ohms. It's basically just a hot-rodded Celestion Elite 80. Full stack weighs in under 45 pounds, so pretty light if you want to just take it to a gig. Let's walk through a little bit about what's on this front panel here. This tight switch cuts out about 6 dB of bass. It's kind of like a high-pass filter, just meant to get rid of some of the muddy stuff if you have a very bass-heavy guitar. The bright switch, inversely, will add about 8 dB of kind of treble, sparkly shimmeriness. Gain knob, you have your onboard EQ, your master. The variable watt knob, what I was talking about earlier, for your bedroom, you can set it super low and not destroy your neighbor's ears, or 20 for playing a loud gig, I guess. And then you have the tube mix feature I was talking about earlier. You need to go 100% EL84 or 100% 6v6 or somewhere in the middle. I think this amp is good at a lot of things. I think it would be pretty solid if you were in like classic rock, blues, indie rock band. It does a lot of like the mid-gain stuff pretty well. I think that bass cutting switch or the tight switch or whatever is pretty useful. Like if you're playing a Les Paul, to still kind of get like the character of your neck pickup but not have to muddy it up with too much bass. And I think that if you wanted to play this in like a high gain metal setting, it would be possible. I think you would need to have the bright switch activated, and I think you would have to have that gain pretty high, and it wouldn't necessarily be the first amp I would reach for if I was playing in like a Deftones tribute band or something like that. But I also think that the advantage of that is that you have like the effects return on the back. And just to be clear, I did not use that in this demo because I wanted to kind of focus on a review of what this thing would be like if it was just standalone, if you didn't really have the budget for that. But other big advantages, like I said, I really think that those 2 switches for like the high boost and the high cut are actually pretty useful. I think that the tube blending feature is also pretty cool. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like a night and day difference, but it is pretty cool to go from like that 6v6 like American classic tone to more of like the British bite like EL84 tone. So I don't know, it's a cool feature. Again, I wouldn't say it's like the most stark contrast, but you can definitely hear it. And the output is really solid too. I mean, if you're just like playing around in your bedroom, this is going to be completely fine. And if you're playing at like, say, a pretty reasonable sized gig, you could show up with this and people might make fun of you for having kind of a dorky little lunchbox amp, but it is still like pretty loud and it can kind of get the job done. I think this is actually a pretty good studio weapon too, because it's pretty portable, which I really appreciate. Like I could just put this in my closet if I wanted to and pull it out whenever. And I think that there's enough of a difference between the 2 tube settings that you could actually get a pretty good variety of tones. Like I could very much see you splitting up a left and right guitar track, one being the 6v6, one being the EL84, and getting a very good kind of blend and like stereo field of guitars. I also think that the packaging is pretty good. I mean, this thing's going on 20 years old and it feels pretty pristine. And it's had a sheltered life, to be honest, but it just feels like pretty high quality stuff. Like most amps of this size, if you want to get some good cleans, you are definitely going to need some help with some pedals and effects. But if you're a gigging musician who kind of just needs one one amp for everything, I think this could be a pretty solid competitor at a pretty competitive price point. If you're looking at some good tube options, meaning not just one sound, but having kind of the ability to blend between two different sounds, this is obviously a pretty appealing deal. It's kind of like having like a fast SUV or like one slow bad SUV in a sports car. This is kind of like the fast SUV. It does everything like pretty decently. Would not really recommend this to metal players, would not really recommend this to people who are like jazz musicians or something who need lots of headroom for clean tones. Also wouldn't recommend this if you're just somebody who hates knobs and just wants like a plug and play amp. So the Egnater 20, I think it's a pretty cool kind of like bang for the buck deal of an amp. I also think the story behind it is kind of cool. I think it being so bespoke is kind of cool. You're like a part of a community that probably doesn't mean anything to other people because it doesn't affect the playing experience at all, but that means something to me, so I kind of have an emotional attachment to this brand. Without further ado, here's some playing demos of some different settings through the Egnater Rebel 20. Thank you so much for watching.